More now on breaking news coming out of Brunswick, Georgia today, where 3 white men were found guilty of murdering 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery. Travis McMichael, who shot and killed Arbery, was found guilty on all 9 counts. This means he could face life in prison. Now, Greg McMichael and William Roddy Bryan were also found guilty of murder, and prosecutors are seeking life in prison without parole for all 3 of those men. And reaction to the closely watched case is pouring in. What do you think this verdict means, not only for the Black community, of course, but also for the country as a whole, having watched this trial play out and watched the video evidence play out as well?
I think for some people in the country, they're recognizing that this is not going to be like the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? Mm-hmm. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people, though, we're seeing them realize how much public pressure it took. You know, there was a comment made to me that, yeah, this is great, but the problem is that before that video went public, they didn't look like they were going to charge them. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't take social media and all eyes upon you for justice of any kind to happen, for accountability to occur. And this feels like a conviction that happened because they had no other choice.
Mm. And given that we are seeing reactions pouring in this afternoon, I'm curious what you have found to be a misstep in the discourse and analysis so far. Is there anything that you've seen that you just feel is not an accurate or potentially sound analysis of this verdict today?
I think anyone who thinks this is proof that things have changed is ignoring a lot of context, right? This case isn't a dictate of how the cases are going to go anywhere else. This case isn't even an analysis of how the rest of America is going to react. Because what I keep coming back to, the reason we have that video is because they released that video of themselves. They genuinely thought it proved that they hadn't done anything wrong. Right. And there are people still arguing that there must have been more to the story. Well, why was he in this building under construction? Well, why was he running? As though Black people don't just exist in neighborhoods and do things like jog and be curious.
I would love to hear what you think, too, about the reaction to the verdict and how that potentially contrasts with some of the jargon that we heard, particularly from the defense during the trial. Just 2 days ago on this show, we were talking about some of the remarks from defense attorneys that led Ahmaud Arbery's mother to exit the courtroom. How do you square the defense's remarks regarding Ahmaud with today's verdict?
I think the defense was doing their job, however abominable I find their job to be in this case. But I want to say this. At some point, the defense attorney very clearly was okay with re-traumatizing a murder victim's mother, was okay with defending people who had committed a lynching in full video view, and was going to stand up in front of a camera and either do his work and it's not personal, or he genuinely believes it. And we saw people really trying to argue that, well, you know, she was running. He should have stopped. He should have explained what he was doing there. He should have. At some point in there, you have to stop and ask yourself, at what point do we say, wait a minute, it's not on the victim or the victim's family or the victim's support system to make it easier for the people who killed the victim to get away with murder.
And obviously the state trial is finished. We're just awaiting sentencing. But I do want to look ahead with you to the federal hate crimes trial, which will begin in February. Do you feel that today's verdict could have an impact on that trial?
Oh, I think that the federal hate crimes trial, I always expected that to be the one where we might see consequences just because of what we saw in the video and just because of their other rhetoric. I assume that it will have an impact. I also suspect, though, that they may suddenly decide they want to plead to the feds rather than face another life sentence.
Right. And we're already hearing that there's going to be an appeal as well, potentially. I also, sticking with federal responses, want to talk about President Biden's reaction. In response to the Rittenhouse verdict, he said, the jury system works and we have to abide by it. What did you make of that reaction? And I'm curious also if you could tell me what grade you would give the White House's response to these trials that we've seen over the course of the past couple weeks.
Is is there something below an F? Like, what are we doing? Is there a Z grade for this? Because while I understand that he is the president, and this is sort of what the speechwriters have come up with, and this is where, governing the entire country, the jury system didn't really work in the Rittenhouse trial, in my opinion. Okay, granted, we do really love the idea of the jury system working. But if you can recognize that what the jury did here wasn't enough, and not enough has occurred, you probably should have been able to recognize that what happened with Rittenhouse was also not enough.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. In our final minute together, Mikki, I'm curious if there's anything else that you are looking ahead to in terms of what this verdict could mean, not just for the Black community, but again, for the country as a whole. I know you mentioned that this isn't something to be optimistic about in your view. How do you think it affects our country going forward then?
I think that unless our country is willing to admit that this was a lynching and that it took a lynching on video for them to even consider a conviction, we're not really moving that fast. America spent more time with lynching being legal than we ever want to admit. And we are still, to some degree, saying, well, yes, okay, this time we're gonna hold this person accountable, but we're not gonna hold the system that made them think committing a lynching was acceptable, accountable. We're not going to look at the people who would have enabled them to get away with it if they could. We're just going to say, this time the lynching didn't happen. See progress. I would like us to not get to a point where we have to see a video of someone being murdered in cold blood before we acknowledge that they probably shouldn't have been killed for running in the neighborhood.
Absolutely. Mikki, really appreciate you joining us and giving us all of your analysis and thoughts on this verdict. Thank you so much. And again, I'll remind our audience that was Mikki Kendall. She's an author and diversity consultant as